Well, good morning and welcome to this session for NAIOP on our education series, The New Normal, Technology and Trends. We've got a great panel for you today to talk about what's happening and what's coming our direction. But before we begin, let me introduce myself. I'm Jim Mellor with Pinkard Construction Company, and pleased to be the moderator today. Today we're going to, well, before we start, let me give you a little bit of a roadmap. This is session 4. Our first session talked about psychology and behavioral patterns. Session 2 talked about the technology and trends affecting industrial and retail. Session 3, office and multifamily. And today we're looking towards the future. So for today's panel, we want to first thank our sponsors. So I have to do the slide thing here. Our sustaining sponsor, Transwestern, thank you very, very much. Our construction corner sponsor, White's Construction. And our supporting sponsor, Pocinelli. So getting into this, we have a great panel today, as you can see, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing them all. I'll let them do that to themselves. But Jenny West, Strategic Director at Gensler, Robert Romps with Kastle Systems, Tom Lolley, MEP, Mechanical Electrical Engineer, and Dustin Williams, founder of Flywheel Technologies. So, buckle up for your trip to the future. Let's open up our minds to what's possible and absorb what's happening here and speak up. If you have any questions, please, in the audience, feel free to raise your hand, flag us down, ask questions as we go online. Feel free to go to the chat and submit your questions there. So with that, hopefully I haven't forgot a whole lot, but there are panelists for you on screen. And then as I think about this panel and I think of, gee, have things really changed all that much? I took a picture in my office yesterday, and I don't know about you, but my lifeline is communication. And there's a picture of my office today. No one has a phone on their desk anymore. Things are changing. It's crazy. I live my life talking to people oftentimes on the phone, and they're gone. So, as I said, buckle up. Here's our trip to the future, and we're going to start with Jenny.
Thank you. All right. Well, great. I'm Jenny West, Strategy Director at Gensler, and my role there is to connect the research that we do with the goals and objectives of our clients to help them make informed decisions with that data. And so I'm thrilled to be asked to come talk about the future. And when NAIOP asked, what is, the next normal, I wanted to bring to light one of the most common questions we're getting, probably many of you in the room are getting. What's the new purpose of the office if hybrid is here to stay, right? So we've been conducting research for decades, but most recently through COVID, investing in what are people saying about their return to office. And so the data today is a result of 2,000 US workers who were surveyed back in May of 2021, so pretty recent. When we asked, what do you feel is the new purpose of the office if hybrid's here to stay? What was surprising is when we sliced that by a generational lens, we could really understand what does each generation want. And unanimously, every generation said to collaborate with my team. That is the purpose. Now, it could be a really easy kind of knee-jerk reaction to say, great, all offices are just for collaboration, and all of your individual mode and work will happen at home, right? And not so fast, everybody. I think that when we look at the top priority, that clearly is the answer, but we also looked at all of the different priorities. And while I'm not going to get to all of this today, it's on our website under Gensler Research, and you can really see the bell curve of different priorities. But ultimately, I think to stick to that narrative, we asked about, what other behaviors that are required for your day-to-day work, where would you ideally do those things? And a couple of these on the slide are more individual based. So where do you think by yourself? where do you conceptualize or concentrate by yourself? And remember, on the previous slide, we just heard that everyone said, well, the office is for collaboration. But what we found when we took that same response set and sliced that through the lens of top performing companies, those who are voted most innovative, most admired, best place to work, and then in the purple column, those are folks who don't have those third-party accolades and awards. We see a complete inverse of where they want to spend their time in individual modes. And I think we could spend the whole time on this slide. I won't hog the panel, but I think this is a really actionable finding to think about, well, why do top performing companies have such an idyllic setting for individual behavior, and unranked companies, seemingly, their people have a completely different view. So when people do come to us and say, what's the purpose of the office? We think it might be really meeting heavy. That might be really true for some organizations, but based on the data, we have a really nuanced understanding of that utility and how it has to meet the individual and the team perspective. And so we know that hybrid is a top preference to stay. What this is showing is just all of the voices of the survey. 52% of people expect that hybrid should continue. In fact, 72% of companies say they are going to offer a hybrid option moving forward. So what does that mean, right, for space? So the implications could mean a few examples. So these are just a few ideas where you have, like, say, open work setting where you have, if you look closely, say, a virtual team dashboard. I know who's in the office. I know who's out of the office. I also have a lot of agility in the physical space because you never know what scale of group and what the purpose of that meeting can be. And so that mixed reality environment is super important. You're seeing on these walls, you know, kind of smart capture walls, different team dashboards. This is an example of a tech-forward kitchen, right? A lot of times it's all about food, but you could do virtual gaming in the kitchen. You could have a virtual coffee or invite a team member to a luncheon virtually who isn't there in person. And I think this is what we're finding. I was reading something from Microsoft the other day where the CEO said, we want, or, you know, our goal is to make that virtual participant a first-class participant, not that person that was forgotten about, right? So how do we morph more of that in person and braid that digital experience in the space? This is another cool example of a community center where you would get a 360 experience, probably spatial audio, virtual participants. You could, you know, as you can see, we have, you know, a hologram in this space or an avatar of your coworkers who can actively participate no matter where they're coming from. And a couple of people say, well, that sounds really futuristic, but we are doing these things today. So on the screen in front of you is the headquarters for Bvlos, and they have the well building standard, which is kind of that sister to the LEED standard. And at their headquarters, they wanted to showcase the comfort and monitor the real-time comfort of the humans in the space. And while I won't have time to play the video, go check it out. It is so cool. But it's real-time data based on 51 sensors of the occupants of the building. It's how many stairs did we do today? It's what's the air pollution this morning? What are some, it's not necessarily business performance, it's all about the health and human comfort. And they wanted to have this artful, user-centric display where people can actually go learn about their colleagues at a really different level. So I realize the scale of this room doesn't match the scale of the font size. However, virtual participants are first class today. They can probably read this beautifully. But this is, a potpourri of different technologies that we were sorting by, what are the different technologies that we are planning for differently that help the building become more of a predictive environment? Or what are those technologies that are norms of today that enhance the awareness and comfort of the humans in the space? And as we see, more plans for robot paths delivering your mail in the workplace, right? Or spaces for that mixed reality, depending on what your environment you're looking to do. This is kind of where the future is and why I'm amongst these talented people on the panel. Last point from the data, one thing that we also found from the generational slice was that the younger generations had a different perspective of what hybrid means. So Gen X and boomers had more of a binary definition of what hybrid means. So they felt like, I'll work from home or the office. However, when we looked at Gen Z and millennials' responses, they were spending time at co-working. They were looking at third places, and that is an expectation of their ecosystem of the work experience in the future. So not necessarily WFH, but if you could take away the notion of work from anywhere and how different people have places that they ideally do those things. So the graphs in front of you are the responses of where am I doing these things the best, right? And the first two blue bars are Gen X and Gen Z saying that these behaviors are best done at third places. So the last thought, just to punctuate what that can mean and roll out to our space implications, is really well celebrated at a recent project called The Link, the old CenturyLink building. And you can see all throughout, there's not an open seat in the place, I promise you. Our principal went the other day, and it's a really popular place for street pedestrians, and also the building isn't full yet, so we know it's popular just from the pedestrian level. But this sense of adding amenities in third places that can add to and accentuate your tenant space is now grounded with a whole host of data that can really start to predict what we do with tenant build out. So that's the potpourri, Jim.
Great.
That's it.
Well, thank you much. And Robert's going to take us down a trip on how we measure these things, how we put them in our buildings.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Robert Romps. I'm with Kastle Systems. We address some of these building technologies, predominantly in how you get your tenants and your visitors in and out of the building with access control. So, as Jenny pointed out, there is a lot of change happening in terms of design and what we're putting into our buildings. That's all driven by new expectations. The pandemic has shifted us. There's a change in collective mindset. We all had to stop working, and that led to a lot of needs to solve problems. We had the challenge of how do we keep going even though we're all at home? And the necessity drove innovation. So we're seeing now new solutions to address all the different things we encountered throughout that problem. This isn't new technology. These are the ideas that were cool ideas before the pandemic that became necessary solutions to the problems that we faced. So that is, to some extent, what is driving the driving factor behind all the change that we're now seeing. You can see on here, we're all now looking at ways that we can change the environment that we interact with. As we deal with those changes, a lot of the solutions are technology-based, and as we all know, when it comes to technology, there are certain expectations that we all have. So we expect technology to be fast, we expect it to always work, and it should make things more efficient. It should be effortless. We all get very frustrated when things don't work correctly when it comes to technology. Like I said, this isn't new. All of this technology has been in development. What we've seen is an acceleration of it. As 5G has been introduced into our world, it's opened the door for lots of other innovation. Applications that wouldn't work before are now becoming, they're becoming viable. Things like edge computing and cloud-hosted computing. We now have the bandwidth to support that type of technology. Process virtualization has evolved, and we're seeing new applications for it, digital twins and 3D printing. The advancements are driving certainly this innovation, and they're not new. They've been in the works forever. We're seeing that acceleration. The other thing that we're going to see as a result is the challenges that we face, things like cybersecurity, data breaches. How do we address those things? As our buildings become more connected and more automated, that's another thing that we need to face. So for our commercial real estate world, we're starting to see all types of new technologies and innovations. I'm sure most of us are familiar with a lot of these things, where it was nice to have some of these things in the past. Now it's becoming more and more a necessity in order to keep up with the challenges that we face and the expectations of those utilizing the spaces. At first, when the pandemic started, we found that the technology in our buildings, all of a sudden we needed to remotely manage that technology. And in many cases, we couldn't do it. We couldn't go to the office, so we had no visibility as to what was happening there because we had no remote access to the technology that was in the building. Now, as we're starting to go back to work, we need these solutions to address the concerns of our tenants and our residents when they go back into the buildings. We're looking at touchless solutions to reduce the amount of exposure that we have to the surfaces in the space. So those types of things, solving those problems is what's driving this innovation. In multifamily properties, again, same thing. We're trying to address the expectations of the residents. Multifamily is probably a sector where we see adoption of technology even a little bit faster. Even before the pandemic, there was some innovation happening in terms of technology, and that's in many cases driven by the consumer electronic world. So as we start to utilize these things as direct consumers, we start to expect to see them in the environment that we live in. So what's happening as a result of implementing all these new changes, all this new innovation? Property and facility management teams are inundated with responsibilities. We have labor shortages. We have challenges with the accessibility to the office in terms of not everybody being back in work, and the responsibilities of the teams that run those facilities has grown. And as we implement more technology, it will continue to grow. So the critical element here is that the systems we implement have to be efficient and they have to be reliable. There's a lot on this slide, but it's the key to kind of that transition. How do we evaluate what technologies we want to implement in our buildings. What's critical to have? What is actually going to work? What's the future look like as far as necessity? One of the keys here is that all of the technology is becoming more and more integrated. So evaluating how it works together is a critical element. You can no longer just go out and buy a system for your building and expect it to run, and maybe you'll have to invest in an upgrade in 10 years. It just doesn't work that way anymore. You have to understand how that system is going to interact with the other platforms that you're implementing in the building. You also have to take that holistic view. So it's not just one system that's going to solve a challenge. It's typically nowadays an integration between multiple systems that's going to have that, that's going to provide that solution and meet those expectations of your customers. So as you're navigating all this and implementing systems, is this your future? Are you going to have 15 different remotes? For some of us, that was quite a challenge to go to someone's house and not be able to turn on their television because you didn't know which remote it was, right? So how many different systems are you going to end up with? And more importantly, as you implement all these, like I said, it takes multiple systems usually to address functions within a building. So how many vendors are you going to have to call just to fix one problem? You know, if your tenants can't get into the elevator for some reason, do you have to call the elevator company or the access control company? Or is it that you have to call the company that supports your DIS system because the system now relies on cellular communication from a mobile app on a phone, and it's the cell signal that's down? It has nothing to do with the elevator or the access control platform. How are you going to navigate all that? It can be extremely confusing and efficient and unreliable if you don't have clear solutions for solving challenges. And quite honestly, that leads to a really toxic environment. Your staff and your tenants get very frustrated, and everybody's overall attitude about the property then becomes, like I said, toxic. We're all going to have to navigate these integrated solutions, and on a positive note, they're going to provide tremendous benefits to our properties. You can see here the important aspect as you move forward is that you need to look at what technologies you're implementing and look at it from the perspective of the tenant and the resident. Jenny mentioned Gensler works with their clients to evaluate these things, and so that's the key lens, I think, when it comes to looking at the solutions that you're going to implement, is that what is the impact on those that are going to interact with those systems? You can see here, we're seeing brand new buildings these days implement technologies, and the tenant ends up with multiple credentials to access the building. They end up with multiple apps to interact with the building. In some cases, you have to present a card to the parking garage and then use your mobile app, your elevator mobile app, to get to your floor, or your mobile app to get in the building and a different mobile app to get to your floor on the elevator. Your tenant suite may have a card or perhaps a mobile app. And then the building's going to give you a tenant amenity app that connects you to the communication with the management company and connects you with the services that they want to offer through that amenity app. That can be challenging. Do you really want 4 apps on your phone in order to interact with the building? So, no, you don't. You absolutely do not. So that's the key lens to look at is yes, you're coming up with these great ideas, but how do they work together? And that's part of what I think the challenge is for all of us as we move forward. But looking at it from the correct lens, I think, is important. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. And I don't know about the rest of you, but my frustration level is just going up listening to all of these type of things. And yes, I was the guy that stood in line for a half hour trying to get my car out of the parking garage at the hotel because the access code wouldn't let me out. And what do you do? Is it the access code? Is it the connection? Is it... So, yeah, solve that for us today, will you please?
And the key is support. You know, as you implement systems in all these buildings, you have to have support. You have to clearly define who's going to be responsible for what, and who do you call when something doesn't work. And in order to do that, you have to have a deeper understanding. It's challenging, but we need to clearly understand what technologies and how they interact with each other so that you know who to get support from. And you need to make sure you have that support moving forward.
Right, and then you have these incredibly intelligent, brilliant IT people that are all in their 20s or 16 or however old they are. And then you've got old dogs like me that just go, is there any training for this? Where's the manual? No, we don't do that anymore. And so to put all of this together and to make it invisible and seamless is our MEP, mechanical electrical engineers, who have to give us the environment that we all want to be in and protect us from all things unseen like viruses. So Tom, walk us through what's the future hold in the MEP world.
Very good. Thank you, Jim. And I certainly want to thank NAIOP for the opportunity to be with you guys today. And Jim touched on one. I have a primary theme in the 4 topics I'm covering here today: the technology, mechanical system, plumbing system, lighting systems. And that theme is, for occupants of any building, is how can you keep me safe? That is number one in anyone's concern about maneuvering back to a facility to work in any capacity, hybrid and or home. They absolutely need to know they can be kept safe. And the success of that building owner is answering that question in various forms, and they've certainly covered a couple here. The extension of that safety component and space safety that sets in the mind of most of us is, please don't make me touch it. There is an underlying theme that sets in the subconscious of all of us that says, if I can maneuver around there and tie it to my safety while I do, that means I'm not touching anything. And building owners, building management teams have to find a way to answer that as well. Now, the benefit to that is it's not all discouraging. In my world, somehow pre-prepared, the international codes have had us ready. We've been on the ready from a code standpoint with how we design and how buildings function. And that's been a blessing. And more recently, the energy code, while you race out to here to look at things that sort of meet code, the energy code implemented draws you back in and we get even tighter. But right out of the gate here, we have the technology side and space safety that's associated with it. Some of the technology in the early parts of the world we now live in coming to light, they advanced. There was major concern with that tie to touch. So facial recognition to get into a building, voice recognition, temperature sensors at the entry, some sense of a access card, an app, and or a wristband that tied to your health condition as an occupant as you approach the building was having a conversation with your building management system. That race out there was rapid, it was fast, and it was backed by fear. As the science has developed over the last year, there is a retraction occurring in that technology, and we're kind of finding ourselves in are you interested in leveling up? Is there a minimum ground we should live at? But I think we all watched. We're wiping down the bottoms of our grocery bags. We're wiping down anything someone has handed us. And today, we're not wiping a lot down as we interact through a grocery store, interact through an office. The science has told us the concern for touch isn't as imperative as it was a year ago at this time, but that hasn't completely changed in the occupant's mind. So as a building owner, as a building manager, you need to be conscious of how that perception can be maintained, and that's by not pushing people to touch anything. The gift for us inside that is there are technologies that raced out there, they're implemented, and some people are starting to say, I can back off a little bit. I have good building automation that covers a lot of these things. The other one is spatial concerns. We're all social distancing. There are automated systems and sensors. Jenny touched it. Robert's touched on it. We can put a sensor all over a facility and it can measure about anything. And that tracking of the monitoring and tracking can then lend to a building automation system or building control to really level that up and notify people. So you've got embedded lighting systems, wayfinding. There is an answer to holding the social distancing now and forever potentially. It's a level again, how far do you want to level up? What is your industry's expectation and your expectation for your office building or an industrial building? So everything's out there. What was interesting to find for us in our low voltage arm was how immediately concerning and fearful racing out to not touch something was and how it has rolled itself back. All manageable, and the buildings, facilities ahead of our moment absolutely had answers to that. Full building automation systems were working your HVAC system. There were lighting schedules, building occupancy, unoccupancy, all data controlled, digitally controlled, well ahead of our moment here. So out there enough to sort of cover the bases, even though everyone raced home out of necessity. To bring them back isn't always as costly as your brain tells you it is as a building owner. So I think there's certainly some hopeful moments there. Secondary to that is our HVAC system. We do have a grasp as an occupant of a facility and a human being. This is airborne. We all know it's airborne. The touch has drifted to the back seat, but they still want to understand as an occupant how you're keeping me safe as the HVAC system keeps me comfortable, warm in the winter and cool in the summertime. And in the process of that, how can you make sure what's airborne isn't causing me additional harm and affecting my health and safety? We all raced out there. Boy, wouldn't you have liked to have been the cleaning companies during the last year and a half? They've doubled in size. They've answered this scenario, and the cleaning and disinfecting that all building owners are momentarily living with certainly served that industry. So some industries benefited. But from a maneuver around the building in the hidden systems that I'm supposed to tuck behind walls and above ceilings, yet keep you safe, we had to do some answers too. And I'm going to go there again. The international codes absolutely had already lent us to a level of control in that system that allowed us to make some tweaks, make some adjustments, and really answer to a building owner's or manager's needs. And that's the volume of outdoor air. The perception of outdoor air is perceived to be fresh air, and maneuvering that across the space while we all hang out together and how clean that air is certainly a critical piece of my world mechanically. We're answering it to this day. We're supporting changes to this day. They're not overwhelming. You certainly want to understand what in an existing facility, what the capability of your systems are, and in a new build, you can answer them right out of the gate at the conceptual level of design. We've got multiple systems that we really have kind of come to the surface. We've got school districts who have asked us to more so flush the fresh air through their classrooms. So every system we work with today, because of the codes, have a minimum amount of fresh air mandated to pass through those systems. So we're not just cycling air across you, back through an air handler, and back across you again that's in any way unmixed with perceived fresh air. In that, we can open those dampers up, put a bunch more fresh air in. We can close them down and just cover the occupants. There's demand-controlled ventilation that allows us to just meet the need of the occupant while not consuming crazy amounts of energy. So our digital systems really were out in front of a lot of this. The one that has leveled up is needlepoint ionization. It's tied to the air quality. The ASHRAE is now allowing, and the codes are now allowing, an alternative variance. If you can prove out the quality of the air you're sending into a facility, they allow us to back down that outdoor air component. And when you're backing the outdoor air component, we're no longer trying to cool off 95-degree air down to 70, and we're no longer trying to warm up 0-degree air up to 70. When you're able to do that, the energy consumption that gets tied with that unit really starts to serve the building occupants and certainly the owner and manager while they're trying to watch their costs. So that ability to do digitally with a building management system is key, but every system today, by the energy code, must have an element of fresh air. And if we can prove we can clean that up, we can even reduce that amount and keep you very safe. Those systems are in place. In the process of that, carrying that touch technology exists as well. So you've got thermostats that are programmed, building head-in systems that allow you to schedule how your occupants are in and out of the building. All those were well in place. So we're not far behind. There's just a few things in the positioning of really proving out for your pending occupants that you can really keep them that much more safe. Filtration system. Well, I think some of us are familiar with HEPA filters. If we can catch that virus and entrap it in a more dense filter system, MERV filters, MERV ratings are an element of our story. So filter systems, ionization, UV light for the quality, and additional fresh air are really an HVAC answer we're accustomed to sort of playing with. Now we watch the science and we maneuver that into an optimal place. But we can absolutely, from a comfort standpoint in buildings, keep people very safe, even with the understanding we know we're airborne and less touch. Plumbing systems, my favorite story. There's almost no conversation here. There weren't many of us, even up to 8 years ago, walking into any public restroom that you never had to touch a thing. Just came from down the hall. Probably didn't need to know that. Faucets were censored. The paper towels were free and easy to grab, most censored. Your toilets, your urinals, everything in a public restroom is almost already, based on the codes and the energy consumption, censored and automated. It is the one place we were well ready to not touch a thing. So there's not a lot of conversation there. There's always room to level up, certainly, but the public restroom, almost better than your home, was ready. So that's one that's almost not impactful to a building owner, building management group. So blessings there. Lighting systems, secondary to the plumbing excitement I just gave you, it was well on its way as well. The energy code really drove some of this in the last 2 or 3 years. You've got occupancy sensors. When you move through a space or equipment maneuvers through a facility, there are lights popping on and off. They are in use as you use the area. Light levels are set to a level that allows for the use you're working on. Desktop in an office is different than grabbing something off the shelf in a large industrial facility. Light levels are tied to energy consumption, and cost. All of that was well controlled, well scheduled. You can even set an entire building's lighting system on the full building management system, also sharing your HVAC control, and you can set it for preoccupied schedules. You can take it offline, online, remotely. All of this was well on its way. So from a lighting standpoint, I have the same story for you. It's advanced enough and untouchable enough. The concern for space safety and facility is almost non-existent. There are places in older buildings as they renovate that are going to have to answer these questions. But the technology's there, the lighting systems are there, and we have a great understanding of what those costs can be, variable or otherwise, to the level you want to automate and control them. Lastly, from a personal and business owner standpoint, I certainly wanted to lay out an experience we had in the trauma that was a message delivered from our country's leadership: we're all going home. And a business owner at the time who's asking themselves that question as we evacuate a building: how do I serve my staff at home? In my world, we've got the young ones tell me they get 3 times as much done if they have 3 monitors. So the pace at which they function and push things out the door is tied to the monitor quantity they have. So we got everyone 5 no, I'm just kidding. They've got at least 2, but tied to the 2 monitors is a laptop someone's going to operate from home that has a Revit model on it that is a densely populated, massive amount of data that my team has to maneuver through. So we immediately had to visit each of our staff members who were headed home in this storyline, and we're grateful to this day, 3 to 4 years ahead of this moment, we'd started a remote work program. So we had 70 or 80% of our people were prepared. The machine capacity was ready to operate that software from home. What we then extended to was the few more laptops we needed for those that weren't. And then we had to understand the connectivity at their homes. What's their Wi-Fi condition? What's their bandwidth? So, but we were well ahead. There were people starting fresh. So while you're dealing with the fear of what your business looked like, you're dealing with how to keep staff moving while you're watching work come to a halt in a lot of cases, certainly from a private sector side, because the unknown is just unbearable. In that process, you've got the fear of keeping what staff you have functioning, keeping them in the loop as to what's going on with your business. We started newsletters. We kept even, we had furloughed staff. I'd lost 35% of my work in the first 3 months of being told we're going home. I have no interest in letting those people go entirely. We created internal programs, connectivity, made them the most important ones on the machine every time we turned around. It was a critical piece of the puzzle: communication, communication, communication. I think in closing with you, I think there's a comfort level from my side that, you know, we were 70 or 80% there with our facilities. Your age of your facility and the interest to bring it to current, if it was well behind some of those current codes, because you got some out there that are certainly grandfathered in and don't require upgrade as they set and are in use. But as you maneuver forward, and if you're going to entice tenants and occupants to come back, you'll need to address catching up to the codes. But if you've built something in the last 3 or 4 years, you are well on your way. It is not an extreme amount of cost to get caught up to the remaining pieces and get them back in the building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and I appreciate you bringing up the fear factor, the human part of all of this, and it's so real. You can't get away from the emotional side of us as humans being in. Are we going into a dangerous situation or are we not? The senior living market is one of our largest markets, and we watched as they shut down totally in the fear factor in the senior living place. And one of the solutions was the needlepoint bipolar ionization, which has a 99.4% kill rate on COVID and other pathogens, as a solution to come in and say we're going to kill it in the air, we're going to kill it on surfaces through new technologies that gave a whole industry a hope that you weren't putting your parents in a COVID petri dish, that you actually could put them in a safe place. So thank you for that, Tom. Dustin, you can bring it home with all crazy new technology that kind of blows my mind, that we're living in the George Jetson era, and without stealing that, walk us through what's the future in technology from your side.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I'm Dustin Williams. I've founded both FlywheelAEC and Remote Optics. FlywheelAEC came out of me being civil engineer for over 10 years and then taking the leading edge technology at the time to do things like virtual design and construction or BIM, that kind of work, specifically for civil engineering type scopes of work. And then also we were starting some of the very first long range laser scanning and things like that, which would fall into that reality capture category. And then during the pandemic, I co-founded Remote Optics, and we were doing a lot of live streaming from drones and phones, and that was helping a lot of these construction sites that were shut down due to inspectors not being able to get on site. While construction was able to have limited capacity, they can get things inspected and keep moving. I was asked, though, to speak more specifically to drones and construction, and we're going to run through a quick past, present, and future. I like to think that, you know, our team's kind of living in the future as much as we possibly can. We are a distributed workforce. When, you know, everyone else got sent home, we were already there, except for our field technicians who were already taking that data from the field and putting it on our, you know, our hybrid servers and doing all the things that we did every other day. and collaborating with that data in the cloud across other distributed teams. So these are just a few of the recent projects that we were working on all throughout COVID, actually, except for the circular one in Cupertino, and not to be named.
It says Cupertino Tech Campus, right?
It does say that, because it can't, it's a project can not be named. So starting in the past, so when people started, so the technology that was available, the FAA is who's regulating it, and they didn't really have a path for legally flying drones. It became basically that you would have to get a manned pilot's license, and then get some exceptions from all the things that you would need to do to maintain that license. So it was a very arduous task just to be legal. Hardware-wise, everyone's very excited, but the cameras were honestly mediocre. Software, equally mediocre, but it was there. It was all developing. It was early times. It was very exciting. And so the use cases were pretty limited, right? You need the higher resolution, and you need the higher accuracy to really enable a lot of these advanced use cases. And there was a lot of concern around the picture to the right. At that time, the early drones would just fall out of the sky. There weren't a lot of, the hardware and software of them were not as tested, and there weren't as many fail-safes. But not too many years later, things are vastly different. So currently, there is a pilot's license specifically for the use of drones. If you're within 5 miles of an airport, you have to ask FAA for permission. There's an automated system for that called Lance now. The hardware is changing constantly. Our job, just to stay up with technology, takes up, it's basically, I'm like the R&D department. I'm constantly researching and testing and implementing new technology, and it's, sometimes a lot for us to handle. It just changes so quickly. Some of those are just much higher resolution cameras, really high survey grade accuracy GPS information, and then thermal's kind of an outlier, but the first two are really what are enabling a lot of different use cases that weren't available before. So just some of the software that's available now, like really high-end, precise photogrammetry software, which is taking the photos and creating two-dimensional and three-dimensional maps and models. And then more recently, UAV-specific LiDAR. So both photogrammetry has been around since the 50s. LiDAR has been around for decades, but bringing that down to the drone scale and is really just the new thing. So again, those kind of use cases that you can get are really survey grade aerial mapping. Everybody seems to love marketing videos, progress tracking, project tracking or progress tracking of projects. It's every project is doing it in one way or another. This just is like a much more remote friendly if we're talking about the new normal. Everybody has access to the data in the cloud, whether it's on a Procore or we have a geospatial cloud system. And so if you're an owner who lives out of state, you can easily get insights into what your project is currently doing. And then those insights are measurable now. So they're survey grade accurate down to a few centimeters or better, depending on your needs. And so that just enables a lot of different things. We were talking before the meeting about material takeoffs. The low-hanging fruit are just earthwork management and things like that during construction. but even down to centimeter level rebar location accuracies. Like before you would pour concrete, you can find out where all your rebar is and document that for future. So what could be better? It's a nuanced thing, but the LANC system could be more consistent across the country. We deal on projects in all states, many different airspaces, and they don't all treat it the same, even though it's an integrated system. Another thing that you're going to hear a lot about, and may already have heard about, is Bvlos, which is just beyond visual line of sight. So currently, unless you are one of a small handful of people, the pilot has to actually be able to see the drone while it's flying, which is obviously limiting because the drones have the ability to fly much further away from the pilot than they could see it. Hardware, just flight durations where, there's steady increase, but the drones are almost all electrical, like all batteries. So all the advancements we're seeing recently are, battery technologies and getting better thanks to electric cars, all the sensors for autonomous driving, all that technology is really coming into the UAV market. It's really pushing things forward really fast. Let's see what else here. So I think that what I would love to see more of is, especially in construction, is a broader adoption of the survey grade, because if you can measure it, you can manage it. A lot of what's being done now is more marketing and just inspection type photos at a really low level. So on the leading edge currently, I mentioned beyond visual line of sight, which enables some of this drone delivery. It also just allows you to be able to, if you're doing survey grade mapping, it's larger project areas. But right now it's highly dependent upon FAA. There's only, like I said, only a handful of people, including my co-founder, who have that bit beyond visual line of sight. And even then, it's very micromanaged. But there are lots of people like Google and Amazon that are really putting a lot of effort into working with the FAA to make that something that everyone can access. So again, LiDAR. So that's like in the mobile mapping space, basically. We're doing survey grade, LiDAR. You have a LiDAR unit that's shooting lasers out, and it's measuring the amount of time it takes for that laser to get back while everything is moving, and trying to tie that to some sort of localized control if you wanted to use it for survey grade type of work. It's pretty complicated, but it's all perfectly doable at this point. Also, the size of project that typically you would order maybe a plane aerial very quickly if you were a civil engineering or surveying company for a project or an owner. The size of projects that the UAVs can now service is easily up to 1,000 acres, whereas just maybe a year or two ago, 100 acres was a lot, just from the amount of data and transferring it, but also the durations that the drones could fly. And then the whole point of flying the drone is to get data. So what kind of data are we handing our clients? Being able to make that data in a format that works for their systems. So like a Procore or Autodesk products, or something like a mesh that is more lightweight and integrate with their BIM and their virtual design and construction models. And then, like I said, live streaming has been a really big one. That's just been enabled by 5G. So in areas where we have really good connectivity. We're able to do some really great live streaming. Autonomous inspections. That autonomous is getting really, thanks to AI, is really getting more robust. And then indoor flights and thermal. So indoor is it can be difficult because drones typically rely on GPS to position themselves relative to where we want them to be. So indoor flying is, it's the technology to be able to locate itself and maneuver around things safely is really just coming about now. So in the future, I'm predicting a lot more drones, I guess. But this is drones in construction. That's usually an aerial thing in my mind, but there are lots of examples. The Boston Dynamics came out with the robot dog, but that's super helpful. So if we're doing laser scanning, like that's a laser scanning unit on that, and in that picture. The ability to capture data more often also enables a lot more use cases. There's a few projects that we're working on where we're flying the drone daily, which allows monitoring of the actual work getting done on a daily basis. So that's feeding into the financial side of things and pay apps and those types of as-built data, and instead of just like what's more typical is like a once a week, but then you can't monitor the daily activities. The thing that's going to also enable that is just having these expert pilots in like a mission control center and being able to remotely operate the drones instead of them having to do all that traveling and spend all that time out in the field. They'll be able to use their time to just operate the drone remotely. That's also tied to that beyond visual line of sight. Just more autonomy and more AI. All of this is, camera data and LiDAR data, which and all the abilities that we're having with edge computing, all like a confluence is all going to enable lots of different things that we couldn't do before. And then the big catchphrase of the day, digital twins. I really see in construction that there's going to be, a lot less people. There's already autonomous earthwork equipment. There's already drones monitoring that. All you'd have to do is tie those two together, and you can build the site autonomously, at least at like an earthwork level, and that's only going to increase, for sure. And then I was just making a shout out. There is so much new technology out there that we, at the Construction Progress Coalition, it's a nonprofit, that we are creating an owner's decision-making guide. So basically, just things to think through, not telling you what technology you should use, but some of the things you should think about when you're deciding what types of reality capture you might want to use to help all the different stakeholders on your project. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dustin. And as I listen to you, I think of the gap between project concept, design, and construction is getting compressed, and it's kind of like going back to the future, back to the master builder days when one person thought about it, designed it, and built it, and here we are, all back again, but with the technology that's pretty mind-boggling. I saw a video the other day of a single-seat drone car, if you will. It's got about 30 minutes of battery, so from your house to your office, no more streets. It's coming. It's crazy, the world that we live in. So with that, we thank the panelists, but we have some time for question and answers. Jema, any questions coming in from there? All right, well, I have a few of them that I'd like to go through and pick on Jenny to begin with. as I looked at your slides, the top performing companies, those that are having the highest productivity, the highest level of employee satisfaction, enjoyment being part of it, seem to indicate that the office is still the best place for them to do meaningful work. But as you look at the preferences, for the most part, people are saying 43% of the respondents said, no, we want to work from home 3 or more days a week. How do you match those two from a productivity, from a quality, from all of those other things that come with that physical interaction versus the preference of, no, I just want to work from home?
So it's the great debate right now. You know, how do we get people concurrently in the office? That's a big takeaway. A lot of people want to come to the office when their team is going to be there, because otherwise, if I'm Zooming with them, why did I come in? You know, I think that's a big thing, and no one will, after this experience of having flex work and working when and where I want, a lot of people don't want to be told where to be and when. However, when you ask, when you come in the office, do you want to be there concurrently with your team? They say yes. So I think getting on the same page for whatever your team is, if it's R&D that day, what team are we showing up, and making sure that that's a really good experience, you know, for them when they're there. And still enabling people to work in a hybrid mode is really, people want the best of both worlds, you know. There was a huge boom in purchasing dogs, as you know, and so a lot of people are saying, I want to work a little bit hybrid. I've kind of been, you know, enjoying my new pup and walking over lunch, those kind of things. But, you know, getting people to coordinate when they'll be there. I know part of the data set I didn't share today is that a majority of companies out there, top performing, will say they expect people to be concurrently in the office. So hybrid isn't just a, you know, kind of a smattering of show up when you want, because I mean, we're all doing that right now. But if you can kind of stage it where you have certain days, there creates more of a pattern and normalcy to meet that best of both worlds. You know, there's also that segment, 30% of the data says people want to be full-time in the office too, right? So it depends
That
which
would be
way
me.
you roll it up and down. But great question.
J.J. Ament spoke at our very first one of these educational series, and he made the comment that when companies are looking for where they're going to put their next site, the first person they send to that location is their HR department, because the war for talent is so real. Where are we going to find the employee base to get us to launch our company and keep us going into the future? I talked to an architect yesterday that said they're almost 100% of all the young architects that they're interviewing, first question, can I work from home? And if the answer is no, you're coming to the office, they don't come back for the second interview. They're done. So we've got this, you know, expectation of people entering into the workforce that they have that kind of flexibility, yet the proof of highest performing companies saying no, it's in the office that where we find the best collaboration and the best productivity. So it's going to be a heck of a dynamic tension between what we're seeing and what's really working for companies to move forward and be profitable and stay relevant. In that regard, your Gen Z survey, if I can ask another question, they were the only ones in that chart, the only ones that had anything to do about their concern of being in the office was about getting a promotion. Mm-hmm. None of the other generations said anything about their career path and wanting to advance in their career. Additionally, Gen Zs were put high on their list that they want to be around other people to inspire creativity. Mm-hmm. And yet you look at the other generations and that dropped. What's that telling us? What do you do with that?
There's so much to unpack there. So with Gen Z, you think about their tenure in their career. They're up and coming. They need to meet people. They want to be mentored and just, serendipitously overhear how you would handle a difficult phone call, right? There's so much learning there. So I think they value that in-person approach. I also think, a topic that maybe isn't explored because of probably privacy, but I think like the home environment for a junior person, it's probably, sometimes it's a smaller space. You're not moving a lot. It might be a studio apartment or a space you share with others. What we're hearing, is that people want flexibility, but not full-time remote, because who wants to spend their whole, day and nights and weekends in that one singular room? So, I think that a lot of people want to get out, see people, and improve their well-being as a result of that too. The other part about being seen for promotion, when you haven't established your network, you haven't established your rapport and level of trust with your, with the people who are deciding who's being promoted, right? Or deciding who's being put on the best and brightest work, you want to be seen. And I think that's a signal that's telling us that we could do better seeing remote workers. How are we actually, building trust and validating that their work is just as good as when they're in person? So I think there's work to do there to show we see you, remote workers, and no matter in or out of the office, that we trust you.
Where we could spend a whole day talking about how do you manage people remotely and still get the best quality of work coming out of that. So thank you. Robert, and this was a question that Robert said, oh, don't go there. But all of this...
you just talk all day about it.
I know, all of this, all the tracking that's going on and all the tracking that's available, whether it's, I'm wearing my watch and it knows where I am every minute of the day, and it's accessing it. So a couple questions that come out of that. One is on the human side of, is that what humans really want? But I'll leave that maybe for a different day. But getting all these systems to integrate and getting all of them to talk to each other. I just know at my company, and I look at all of the different softwares that we have, and trying to get them to all make sense to somebody. We have, pretty soon you're thinking, okay, on a dashboard, my car has 4 gauges on a dashboard. At company, I could have 400 gauges because we have 400 different programs that we're working with. When is this coming that things are going to integrate, and what's that going to look like that we're all hoping for, that says, oh yeah, this will be easy, just do this?
So easy for someone to manage is critical, without a doubt. I think the integration of platforms is only going to accelerate. And the key will be evaluating how that gets supported moving forward. It changes the way we buy things. We used to just buy things and use them, and then get something new when it's needed. Now systems in particular, they have to evolve, and you have to have support through that evolution process. So you can't just buy something and expect that you're going to use it. You're going to need ongoing support for that, and it's going to have to evolve in terms of integration with other platforms and how it gets utilized. So we're seeing we at our company implemented mobile apps in 2016 for accessing a building. It was a credential, and we did it for many reasons. Predominantly, it's a more secure credential. You can copy an access control card. You can't copy that digital credential because it's encrypted. So we implemented that technology. What we've seen is that has evolved, and in particular, it's evolved rapidly to all different kinds of use cases, because our customers said, we need this. And so we were able to evolve the existing technology to provide those solutions. So I think that's the key. I think you have to have support in the things that you're bringing together so that integration remains functional. Otherwise, if you don't have clear support, you end up with just a bunch of finger pointing. Your stuff doesn't work. We've done everything we can, and what are those relationships? That's the key, I think, to investing in technology right now.
It seems to me that's as technology increases and that we see, all these amazing startup companies with these incredible ideas coming up with great new inventions or whatever, that we get more fragmented, more splintered. And how do you bringing that all back together so that it's usable as a continuum seems to be the challenge that we're going to be facing for a lot of years in front of us, and that's where companies like yours come to play to help us integrate it all and make them all work together.
Sure.
Excellent. Tom, as you look at all the MEP stuff and great presentation on what's out there and how your industry has been ahead of the curve in many different ways. Yeah, that's great for that building I'm thinking about today. But as I look around Denver, I think something like 70% of all the buildings in Denver were built before 1980. What's the trending for some of these old buildings? I mean, I look at them, I go, can you bring them up to date? Can you bring them to the future? Or is obsolescence just set into the bones and they're not going to be able to be adaptable cost effectively?
I think the majority of them you're going to find to be adaptable. We sort of have a parallel path that's occurring in a lot of those older buildings in our moment. All of you are probably aware the electrification of our country and perhaps the globe, the decarbonization of how buildings heat themselves is another element that we're carrying along the way. So that parallel path, along with the technologies, there's an acceptance component for some building owners. If the building's viable from a structural bones and envelope standpoint, and it well built, and it still has a place for a pending user, there are reasonable, cost-effective answers to bring it along from a technology, access standpoint, functional standpoint, in addition to finding a way to decarbonize it. So that element on both sides of that story are extremely important as we move forward. And the benefit that's there is some of your design guidelines and some of your standards, your ASHRAE, your ASPEs, your NFPAs that sort of set the model for how the codes eventually set their minimum are already out in front of some of this and having those conversations. And in your world, and I might ask you this question back when I'm done, we notoriously early on at the concept level of addressing an existing building are having conversations about the systems and the viability, and there's always a moment in time that someone says, we really should just tear it down and build a new one. And then the brainstorming starts, and then the calculations roll in the backside. And I would guess 7 times out of 10, maybe a little more, let's find a way to hang on to that thing and just renovate it, get it to where it needs to be, and we keep on moving. The cost of full replacement never seems to be that final answer. So out of necessity and out of a cost control component, you're going to find a way to bring the 1980 building back online and make it today's use.
Thank you. That gives those of us who have a big renovation component of our work, our world, bright hope for the future, right? If we can, Dustin, just as you, I know your world is drones, but in you looking forward, what are you seeing beyond the drone world that's closing the gap between design and construction in terms of robotics? Are you starting to see robotics starting to come into the discussion anyway of how do we bridge the gap, and especially in today's world of labor shortages, which you mentioned on the earthwork side, but beyond earthwork, into the building side. And I know we see some of this in China and Japan where they've toyed with it a little bit, but it really hasn't become adaptable. In the next 10 years, what do you see out there?
So, like even just now on these complex, really large projects, the schedules are just completely condensed. When we're doing our BIM coordination, the design's still not complete yet, right? We're doing BIM coordination on design development plans. We're doing design development on planning documents that are not approved. The timelines are just so long, and so we're getting creative in order to deliver that project in a reasonable amount of time, and we can get people in seats in the new normal version. So there's a lot of different things that are enabling that. Drones and just being able to quickly measure and monitor things. But there's a lot of different forms of that. Soon enough, those drones will be operating autonomously at night after people leave. There's a lot of different forms of task type drones too. We're not just talking about capturing the space as it changes. There's a lot of robotic assistance. So even now, there's like drones that will let you lift heavy objects without putting hardly any effort into it. You're just guiding it, really. All the survey layout is all starting to become done robotically. Even today's total stations are called robotic total stations. And then it's all other things, like there's a lot of material science out there that's coming down the line that will be allowing different types of structures to be printed, and that's going to be printed by a robotic system itself. So that will also enable different types of structures, like conceptualized by companies like Gensler, and then also just be able to be built much more quickly, I think.
Well, it's fascinating to think and see the videos of houses being built by 3D printers out in remote areas using native materials, and when does that come to the main front? And we're all looking at that when we look out at the skyline and all the tower cranes are gone and drones are flying around stuff and 3D printers are putting out it, and think of, I think I need to change my career path. I don't know. But any other questions, audience? Joe.
Okay, to bring this to a pretty granular level, technologies that are getting implemented, and NAIOP being developers, property owners of various asset classes, what do they need to buy, right? Like, what should they be researching to either physically implement into their properties, or services and things that they need to have the team deliver the project better? So I'll cheat and give you a couple examples. There's one, Zoom skyrocketed, security issues plummeted. At the same time, Microsoft was investing in Teams. Teams all of a sudden, like, if you weren't using Teams, like I wasn't, then all of a sudden people were like, dude, can you send me a Teams link? I hate Zoom, right? So that was like a soft-oriented thing. Or video conference rooms for meeting spaces were pretty much in vogue beforehand, for large corporates at least. A lot of that technology was produced by the actual provider of the service, right? So if you had all the Zoom cameras that were geared towards Zoom, like that was more challenging. What's the new video conference kind of setup look like for Zoom equity? And yeah, so I'm kind of cheating and giving you kind of two examples, but yeah, I mean, what should people be buying or planning for? Oh, here, I'll give you a third one that I'll take off the table. Wi-Fi as an amenity came up in a previous panel. And what does that really necessarily mean? And it was used mostly in like a multifamily space. But if you own a piece of property or you're developing one, what should you buy? And you can't say drones, and you can kind of say Kastle-ish. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm going to repeat the question just for those that are watching virtually. What should you be buying as a real estate developer to stay ahead of the trends and make your project successful for the future. Does that encapsulate it?
Two things. Yep.
Okay. Who's first?
Well, I'll take a shot out of the gate there. Again, back to the conscious thought of most of us when we enter a facility, and that's how do you stay safe? I think anything and everything hands-free as you move about a facility is a must. Secondary to that, the perhaps upgraded, high-efficient, highly filtered air quality with regard to my setting here is also a must. And the provability that those systems are in place and your air quality is measured and it's got an output data piece that tells your occupants where they stand at all times with regard to their health is absolutely a couple.
So landlords have to do touch-free bathrooms when they're developing new properties?
Mm-hmm.
And get UV filtering or, I always mess up the ionization.
Bipolar ionization.
Thank you. I just want to say deionization. Okay. Who's the next victim?
Well, I'll take it from there. I think touchless is important. I think the underlying theme that as we talk about developing new buildings and the technologies in them or the spaces and how we design them is flexibility. And so I think you need to invest in technology that gives you flexibility and allows your occupants to have individual choice and information. I think they want to make their own decisions, and I think you can do that with technology. I think you can push information to your occupants and allow them to decide how they're going to interact with things. Touchless might be important to some people, but it might not be to others. But I think you have to have that option. I think you have to have that ability for them to interact with the space in the way that they want. So I think that's how you should look at the technology that you're investing in is what is the occupant experience in the property and what kind of flexibility have you given them? And I think part of that is information. We all pick up our phone and look up everything. We have information at our fingertips. So are you giving that information to your occupants? What systems have you invested in that allow them to interact with your facility and have the ability to make their own decisions, have information so that they can interact with the facility the way they want to? I think that's critical. That's not specific to, buy some air quality and buy some touchless stuff. But that's how these integrated systems are evolving, right? That's what they're moving towards. And I think, we're all going to start using mobile apps to control things. Is that mobile app secure? And is it providing individuals with specific information? Right now, most buildings use some sort of work order management system. Well, there's one person with each tenant that has access to that system. And I think we need to move beyond that and give all the occupants of the building the ability to interact with the systems and have information from the systems. So I think it's kind of taking it to that next step to where it's distributed even more.
And Robert, you had mentioned earlier that if I'm a real estate developer and I bring my partners on to make this project a success, whether that's a broker, an architect, a contractor, whatever, that bringing their technology consultant sounds like needs to come to the forefront, needs to be part of it earlier, because you're going to be partnering with them throughout the lifespan of the building potentially.
Yeah, I think we're at a time as you develop a property, it's one aspect that you need to understand at a deeper level, because it's not an afterthought. For decades, buildings were being built, and the access control or some of the other technology was, we'll think about that later, right?
It's an add-on.
We'll figure it out when we get to that stage. I think it's more in the design phase now, more so than it ever has been.
Well, as we only have a few more minutes left, I wanted to just throw out some larger futuristic type questions. And in December of 2018, I was at a event, and a futurist spoke. I'd never heard a futurist before. But his comments were twofold. One was that in 12 years from now, everything you do today, you'll be doing differently or not at all. And then he brought that back and he said, yeah, 12 years is probably too long. And that was in 18. Fast forward about 15 months later, and March of 2020 hits, and COVID hits, which I don't know if it was a catalyst or just an accelerant, but all of a sudden we're doing a whole bunch of things differently or not at all that I never ever saw coming. As you are experts, panelists, no pressure, look forward, what are the things, well, let me ask you to look backwards and ask, what are the things that really have surprised you over the last year and a half of COVID, and what are the things that you think are in front of us that could be a surprise to us? Jenny, will you start?
Sure. I think maybe surprise, obviously all of it was a bad surprise, but part of working with clients and advising and consulting with clients is that it used to be you would take a survey, you would design for your people, and fingers crossed that stays contemporary through a 20-year lifespan, right? Or you design and then here we go, and until there's some gate check where you say, okay, let's refresh some things. And now I think that it is a pleasant, I think, byproduct is that the mindset has shifted to a constant evolution, where it used to be the finish line mindset, but now there is this more culture and willingness to experiment and tinker and prototype and test and constantly refine. Because we all know that the people we surveyed, there's a lot of people looking for new jobs and changing companies. So you almost have to have a bigger picture and a mindset that is about serving humans who do the work that you do well, right? But not to that level of specificity or timestamp that we used to. So,
Robert?
It's interesting you bring up futurist. We just had a futurist speak at an event that I attended, and one of the things that he brought up was that it's a job, it's a position, because if you do the research, it's easy to see what technology is viable and coming in the future. What we don't know is what is the social reaction to that technology. So what gets adopted versus what doesn't. And I think, to Jenny's point, testing and tinkering and that sort of thing is necessary to try and figure out, well, we have great ideas about technology that we can implement, but how are people going to react to that, and what's going to be viable? Jenny showed some futuristic looking office space. Is an interactive video wall a viable solution? Will people actually use it, right? And that's what will determine whether or not that technology is effective. So I think looking at everything from the occupant or the tenant point of view, what realistically should we implement to improve their experience, whether it's in the office or getting access to the office or interacting with the facility. I think that's critical, is we can't guess at what the social response is going to be to technology, but we can constantly evaluate what's people's reaction to the technology that we're implementing right now, and how do we then move forward from there. So,
thank you. Tom?
I think I have a couple of key components that where we used to live and operate to where we're going, and that would be consumption and waste. It was not long ago that you set your thermostat at 85 if it made you comfortable and there was no concern. I think you're going to start to see that consumption of energy really be, and we're watching it, a big conversation as we move forward. And again, the electrification of the world and our country specifically, how do I get more energy out of a kW of electricity than I'm getting out of a natural gas component, and how do I make it cost effective? That level of energy consumption, material consumption, labor consumption, you're about to watch a real reduction in that. And what occurs with that consumption reduction also is tied to a level of waste. If I'm going to be honest with myself, I have to admit, human beings devour product and cast it aside. I think you're about to watch some pretty serious changes occur with regard to reusable, clean, disinfect, make it viable again, and not put it in a waste condition over and over. Even as you get more energy out of a kW, you pass it through an air handling system, you fire it off to the building. Somebody's now asking the question, how do I reclaim what I'm throwing away in the building and reuse it back through the system again? I think you're going to watch consumption of things really reduce, and the level of waste we're used to kind of just maneuvering through and throwing out in the trash can. There's going to be a major focus on the drastic reduction of both of those components.
Amen. Preach it, brother. Dustin, any surprises?
I think we're already seeing it with this past 18 months, but people want to be a little more independent. There's a lot of people exiting the workforce and becoming their own, independent contractors. We still need project teams, right? But these project teams are starting to get put together more from multiple independent sources. So I think, as much as people want to be connected and brought together, they don't necessarily want to work the same. Just like, maybe in the past, people will work 40 years in a factory. On the other end of the spectrum, I think we're getting to a much more independent kind of contractor. And kind of in line with that, I think people are going to want to have the best of both worlds, and be completely connected when they want to be connected, and then be able to disconnect and access like the outdoor environment when they want to disconnect. So.
Great, thank you. Well, one thing I can say about the future that I absolutely know with certainty is that I don't have a clue. We're going to be surprised by a lot of things, and probably equally dismayed by as many. But I want to thank our panel today for giving us a quick glimpse into the future and what's coming. Thank you all so much. I want to thank our sponsors again. We have our sponsors with Plassinelli. We have it with the Whites Company, and also with Transwestern. As a quick reminder, there is a survey that goes on after this. We'd ask that you'd please fill it out so that we can have a better feel, metrics on how to improve our offering for you. And then there will be a recording of this video if you need to watch it in the future. Again, here we go, back in the future. But the most important thing about the future that you need to mark on your calendar right now, it's an event you certainly don't want to miss, because it's going to be the best event of the whole holiday season, is the free, yes I said free, NAIOP in Dencar annual holiday party at the Raleigh Hotel. It's on both the Dencar and NAIOP website. Go on, register, and happy Thanksgiving to you all. Hope you have a wonderful holiday, and thank you for tuning in again.